If you like the sweet science, get ready to talk boxing on the Gloved Fist podcast with top boxing writers Frank Lotierzo and Jack Hirsch. Frank, a former amateur boxer out of Philadelphia, writes for NY Fights and can be seen on the Boxing Channel. Jack, an amateur boxer who competed in the New York Golden Gloves, was a 6-term president of the Boxing Writers Association. And now, here's Frank Lotierzo and Jack Hirsch.
And we're back. Welcome to Glove Fists. My name is Frank Lotierzo, former fighter, part-time writer, full-time observer, joined by co-host Jack Hirsch, former 6-term president of the Boxing Writers Association of America. Jack, I know you have an announcement you want to make. Let me just say this. We have a lot to talk about tonight. It's going to be a great show. We're going to agree and disagree. But I am so jacked for Crawford and Spence 3 weeks away that I can't remember the last time we had a fight where you had two guys close to their prime, undefeated, with a legitimate claim as to who the best in the division is. We will get to that. I know there's something you want to address off the bat. So good evening. Nice to see you. Time's yours.
Yeah, good to see you, Frank. On a somber note, longtime boxing writer by the name of Jerry Glick passed away. I'd like to give him a mention. Maybe most of you haven't heard of him, but he wrote for Seconds Out for years, International Boxing Digest as a correspondent. Good reporter, very good reporter, dependable, loved the sport, passed away after long illness. And
let me just give you a quick thought.
Not just a professional, but on a personal level as well.
A quick thought, Jack. I didn't know Jerry Glick. I knew the name. I can be a boxing snob sometimes. But I remember when I saw the byline, Jerry Glick, it registered in my head, whatever the title was or topic. I remember being a little inquisitive about what he had to say or how he looked at it. So
exactly. He loved the sport. He was a longtime fan. I was responsible for getting him into the sport, as a writer, but he took it from there. He made his mark on his own talent, his own knowledge, and real good guy, real dependable reporter. If every reporter was as dependable as he was, then the sport would be, a lot better off.
Well, I'm glad to hear that, Jack. And if you have respect for him like that and valued his insight, that tells me my insight was pretty good, because I remember thinking he was a guy. Well, I want to hear what he has to say. Okay. Well, the big news is that there was a fight this weekend between two top contenders, Jaron Boots Ennis and Roymond Villa. I think he was ranked number 8 going in, and Boots is probably considered number 3. Jack, I'll let you give your thought on it. I'm just going to throw one thing out and you take it from there and I'll respond.
Let me tell you, Roymond Villa is a good fighter,
Very
good, solid fighter. And he kept coming at Boots, and he came to win. He was strong, had a good punch, and the pressure was on Boots to prove his worth, because Boots could have easily faded if he was nothing special. How many times have we seen it, Frank? A talented fighter outboxes his opponent for 6 rounds, then starts coming apart. But Boots took it to another level. He showed he can last the course. The whole fight long, from bell to bell, from the first bell to the last, Boots can fight his fight. Exceptional talent, Boots Ennis. And I know how much you want to talk about Crawford and Spence, but I'll tell you, when Crawford and Spence are done, if one guy establishes his superiority over the other, he can't rest easy, because he's going to look behind him, and that's Boots Ennis. And from a business sense, they should be happy to have Boots, because it's a lot of money. But from an artistic perspective, I wouldn't like the idea of Boots there. I could see Crawford and Spence avoiding Boots, going out of their way when they're done with their business.
You know what's funny, Jack? Boots and Crawford are my two favorite fighters in the game today. And I think they have a lot in common. But let me touch on Boots. Jack, I know Al Bernstein said this, and I was thinking it. I think I have to go back to Sugar Ray Leonard and Tommy Hearns to try to come up with somebody who is as great offensively as Jaron Ennis is. He can throw every punch in the book with speed, power, accuracy from any side and at any range. And he put on a clinic Saturday night again against a guy who came to win, who has a great chin, who has a punch, who was not intimidated, but you could just tell after a couple rounds, they were in different leagues. And Ennis, Jack, he is the real deal. Yeah. He showed he can take a punch. He could have won that fight. You know, if he wanted to, he could have won a decision in that fight and pitched a shutout. But he has that killer gene like Crawford has, like Tommy Hearns has, like Sugar Ray Leonard had, and he wanted the emphatic stoppage win, and he got it. And I'll tell you this, Jack, I said after the fight, he's one of those rare guys that if you bring the fight to him, you are walking into a buzzsaw. And if you don't, and you try to outbox him from the outside and wait on him, you're at his mercy. The guy just has everything, and I could see he is the boogeyman.
Let me play devil's advocate, even though I share the same high opinion of Boots and Ennis that you do. You made a comparison to Hearns, Leonard, and Crawford. Boots doesn't hit as hard as Tommy Hearns. He doesn't. No. Hearns is a harder puncher. Let me go a step further. He doesn't hit quite as hard as Sugar Ray Leonard. Leonard was a more precise puncher, okay? More, and now we talk about Terence Crawford. Let me make this argument. Crawford can punch faster than Boots, okay? Just playing devil's advocate here. Boots is the complete package, but as far as being a power puncher, he's merely a good puncher as far as power goes. He has a lot of power.
You think he's only good?
He's not a devastating puncher. You know, he kind of has to hit you more times than the other guys I just mentioned.
But, Jack, what he has is, and this is big, he has the accuracy. And the accuracy does make up for the power. Now, the guys we just compared him to are the elite of the elite. I'm not going to put Crawford quite there yet. No, he is not the puncher that Tommy Hearns was, but I think Tommy Hearns is one of in the top 10 best pound-for-pound punchers in history. He doesn't have anything in his arsenal compared to Sugar Ray Leonard's left hook, but I think he has plenty of stopping power, and I think it's multiplied by the fact that he hits you cleanly, he hits you fast, and he's repetitive with it. And his repertoire and his imagination as far as the way he puts the punches together, he's impossible to defend. And something else he has in common with Crawford, and I saw some guys mention that today, Jack, and yesterday. Well, they're going to find a reason to nick him, and they're going to say, well, he can be hit. Well, you're right. He can be hit. But like Crawford and like Sugar Ray Leonard to a degree, their offense is their defense. And they also want to take you out with everything they throw. And when you do that, you're in position to get hit. Where guys like Benitez and Mayweather, they sacrifice some offense to have a great defense. So when I hear guys say, well, Boots is hittable, Crawford can be hit. Yeah, you're right. But they're willing to stand in that fire zone to take you out.
The question is, Crawford, Spence. Let's say both guys win decisively and they can move on. If Spence beats Crawford clearly and he's able to move on, does he fight Boots or does he move up a division? Does he deliberately try to avoid him? We're talking Spence now.
I can't answer that, Jack. You would think with Charlo moving out of that division that Spence might look at the junior middleweight division as his. And then he might think, well, why am I going to take a chance and lose all these belts to one guy after I win them? I don't know, regardless of who wins. I
will
don't
tell you
know
this, Frank.
what road they're going to go.
Errol Spence would then fight Tim Tszyu instead of his stablemate Jamel Charlo.
Interesting fight.
If Crawford wins decisively, let's say he stops Spence and Crawford is on top, number one pound for pound in the world, tremendous buzz. Big money fight with Boots Ennis, but he could avoid it if he wanted to. Is Crawford enough of a dog that he's going to take that fight? I like have an attitude. I don't give a darn. Bring Boots Ennis on. Does Crawford have that self-belief?
Jack, I think of those two.
Spence doesn't have.
I think there's a better chance if Crawford wins and looks really good. I think there's a better chance that Crawford would fight Boots than I do Spence would. And that leads me to another point, though.
Yeah.
Boxing math is never works out where A beat B, but B beat C, but C couldn't beat A. I believe that if Boots was fighting Spence on the 29th, I would actually feel more comfortable betting on him to beat Spence than I will Crawford. However, I do think that Crawford matches up better with Boots than Spence does. And the reason I say that is because this last fight with Royman, he's the same way. He's not quite as good as Spence, but Jack, he only has one gear. That's forward. I don't know if that works against Boots Ennis because, as I said earlier, his punch repertoire, the speed, the angles, everything he does. I think if you get a guy that can only go forward, and Boots said this before the fight, he's made for me. So I think Boots would beat Spence where I'm not sure he beats Crawford.
I think the way to beat Boots Ennis, and what a monumental task that's going to be for anyone, is to take the fight to him, get him out of his comfort zone. Don't let him pick his spots. Force him to fight every moment, because if he can't be calculating in the ring and pick an opponent apart, he's going to lose a little effectiveness, kind of like a lighter weight class fighter who we're going to talk a little about, Inui, the Japanese fighter who could take it to an opponent, hit really hard. You have to be able to shake Boots Ennis up at certain points. Throw him off.
Jack, that's a great point, but here would be my counter to that. I think on paper, that's the way to do it. But what if that's not your style? Like Duran of Montreal, his style would be a problem for Boots. But if you're Terrence Crawford and you're going to fight Boots, would you have him fight that same style? I'm not sure I would.
No, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. You know, it's Crawford Spence. The winner of that fight has every right to call themselves maybe not just the best welterweight in the world, but arguably, especially in the case of Crawford, the best pound for pound fighter in the world. But we have to consider the window of them being at their peak might be closing. Maybe maybe Crawford's a little past his peak. That would be a concern. He's 36 years old. I mean, it's got to catch up to fighters at a certain point. And when you get in your late 30s, you know, it could be problematic.
I have two thoughts on that, Jack. One is Crawford may show in this fight that he is on the decline. And there's another side of me that says we may see the best version of him we've ever seen, for the fact that Spence being at his level may bring out the best in him that we've ever seen, because we really have never seen anybody push him like Hearns did Leonard in that first fight. We've never seen anybody push Boots where he really had to dig down and reach back and come up with something spectacular to win. Because let's face it, Jack, none of his fights have really been close, and he's really never been close to losing a fight, where Spence at least had a couple close calls.
Now, I don't think Boots is going to get a big fight for a while. I just don't see the few top echelon guys voluntarily fighting him. They'd sooner give up a belt. Maybe Crawford would if they'd offer him amazing money. Crawford's a lot like Sugar Ray Robinson, Frank. And I'm talking about outside the ring.
I know what you're saying.
Robinson was the toughest negotiator you can find. And Crawford's a lot like him. This guy's willing to hold out till he can get what he wants. Nothing phases him. So maybe someone would make him an incredible offer to fight Boots, and then I think he would take it. I don't think Spence is going to wait for North. I think he jumps up to junior middleweight one way or another.
Jack, you just scared me with something you said. And you know what that is? Crawford is also the exact same age that Sugar Ray Robinson was when he started to show effects of being on the wrong side. 35, 36.
He was still a great fight in his late 30s, but it started getting to him, guys.
Right.
We would have beaten with some room to spare, like Fulmer. Even though I think he did win the fight with Fulmer that they called a draw, their third fight. Basilio, 2 close fights. They split. You know, he would have beaten Basilio. He would have been a couple of rounds better for sure and put some distance between him and Basilio if he was in his prime. But, you know, it happens.
Jack, let me ask you this before we move on. And as I said at the beginning of the show, I'm very, very pumped for Crawford and Spence. I think I like Crawford. I have to admit, I go back and forth, but I'll probably stay with Crawford because I don't like to switch a pick. But what would you say was the last fight where we had 2 guys that you could say they're just about at their peak, undefeated, legitimate claim to being the best in the division, and as good as Boots is, and as much as I love him, he still has never been in with anybody like Crawford or Spence. So he doesn't get that benefit of the doubt that the winner gets in this fight. What do you think the last fight was where you had all these things on the table? The best I can come up with is Trinidad and De La Hoya.
Trinidad and De La Hoya. You know, Frank, he used the dirty word unbeaten. It seems to cheapen things. What happens if a fighter lost a fight early in his career? Should it matter? Let's say Ali wasn't given the decision over Doug Jones. He deserved that decision. It would still be a super fight with Smoke and Joe. What happens if Frazier didn't get the decision in the first fight with Bonavina? He earned it, but it wouldn't have been outrageous.
I think it changes everything, Jack. I really do.
How would our perception have been, you know, the fight of the century?
Jack, I think it changes everything.
But we shouldn't be going there. You know, fighters do lose fights early in their career. I think the Mayweather effect of brainwashing everyone where fighter has to be unbeaten. But the mentality came before Mayweather. We'd hear about Marciano. Well, Rocky was unbeaten, therefore he's the greatest.
Some people thought he lost to La Sarza.
Yeah, but the point is he got the decision, whether you agreed with it or didn't agree with it. And that's the legacy, being unbeaten for some guys. Joe Calzaghe, Andre Ward, they're unbeaten technically.
Jack, what if Kovalev gets a decision the first time against Ward? Look how much different we would look at Ward. And I had Kovalev winning that fight by a point.
Yeah, same here. And Joe Calzaghe, what happens that he dropped the fight? But because they're unbeaten,
it changes everything.
Yeah, exactly.
Jack,
I just want to say one thing on Boots. And then let's move on completely from him. I think you may have, but I just want to say one thing. I want to see Boots in this fight 4 times a year going forward. Force the issue. Not
going to happen.
Keep your name in the news. If he fights 2 times a year against a type of opponent, a good tough opponent like Ramon Villa, who he fought Saturday night, that doesn't do it. I don't care how good he looks. You know, you're not forcing the issue.
He wants to fight Stanios next. Is that going to happen?
If the money is there for Stanios, yeah. Well, and that's the fight that didn't take place. Virgil Ortiz. I mean, I hope everything's okay with him.
Well, we're never going to see him at welterweight again. We know that.
Yeah, but he had some health issue. 3 times the Stanios, Virgil, or what did I say? I say Virgil Hill, Virgil Ortiz.
Ortiz. You said Ortiz.
fight was made 3 times. They had to, postpone the fight, and enough's enough. But listen,
I've watched some Stanios over the weekend. He is really good.
yeah.
I don't think he beats Boots, but he's really good. And if Boots went through him, that's another notch on his belt as far as getting a good win.
Definitely.
All right, Jack, in a couple of weeks, what are your thoughts on Stephen Fulton and Inoue?
I admire Stephen Fulton, real fighter, going to Japan. He called out Inoue. No one was calling out Inoue. Stephen Fulton's smart enough to know if he wants a big fight, he's willing to take the risk. It reminds me of what Devin Haney did with George Kambosos, but the difference is Inoue is on a completely different level from Kambosos. Kambosos is merely a pretty good fighter who had a great night against Teofimo Lopez, but Inoue is the real thing. I mean, his nickname, the Monster, he's given that for a reason. And to go to Japan, do I think he could get a fair deal in Japan? Absolutely. That's not the issue. I just think beating Inoue, no pun intended, is a monster chore. It really is. I could see Inoue taking the fight to Fulton. Inoue, arguably, he'd be number 1 on my list, but arguably on the majority of people's list is the hardest pound-for-pound puncher of all divisions. You take an equivalent. I don't think you have a harder puncher than Inoue in any other division.
I would endorse what you just said. I think Fulton, Jack, could be a bridge too far. Inoue up at 122. That's not really his weight. And Fulton is an excellent boxer who he is not a life taker, but he's physically strong. And I think that with his chin, I could see that being enough for him to outbox Inoue and staying just a step ahead of him for 12 rounds and winning a decision. Now, you've already said you think he can get the decision. I'm not quite as sure as you are, but I think he has the style, the temperament, and the chin and durability that I think that if I had to pick tonight, I might pick Fulton to win that fight. I could be a little bit biased because of the Philadelphia fighter favoritism I have in me and the bias there. But I'm not sold on Inoue that this is automatic, because this is clearly, without a doubt, Inoue has never been in with anybody like Fulton. And you could say that Fulton hasn't been with somebody like Inoue, but I think he's been with guys who are stronger, and I think he's held up well. So that's a very compelling fight. It's on ESPN Plus. We're all going to get to see it. And like you said, if Inoue blows him out, then I don't know if Crawford or Spence can do anything to unseat him as the best fighter in boxing.
Well, if I'm rooting for Fulton, what would give me a lot of hope is Inoue's first fight with Nonito Donaire, where he won on points in a thrilling contest. The decision was fair, but Inoue was pushed to the limit. He looked ordinary in that fight. I mean, Donaire really pushed him. And we're talking about a Nonito Donaire that was past his peak to turn up that type of performance. Of course, in the rematch, Inoue knocked Donaire out quickly, and that was predictable. And was that a reflection of Inoue's ability? Well, maybe he's not all that he's made out to be, because Donaire could have pushed him the way he did, about 3 years ago. But then conversely, Brandon Figueroa and Fulton, that was a close fight.
But Fulton clearly won that, Jack. It was close, but he clearly won.
I won't say clearly.
I think he did.
Yeah, but so Fulton looked like a lot less than a world beater in a fight like that. But can Fulton execute the fight plan, outbox Inoue? I can't imagine him trying to beat Inoue any other way but to circle.
No, he'll have to box him. I will say this. If Inoue can't really hurt Fulton, he's going to be in for a long night.
I think he's going to intimidate him. I think Fulton is going to feel the power. very early in the fight, maybe get shook, and then he's going to kind of be in somewhat of a defensive mode. I think Inouye takes a decision something like 9 rounds to 3, 8-4, 9-3, that range.
I'm not going to make a pick yet, Jack, but if that doesn't happen, and if he doesn't shake Fulton early, I think the longer the fight goes, the better Fulton fights.
Well, a question for you, Frank. What happens if Inouye is sensational, blows Fulton out, looks magnificent, and Terence Crawford or Spence, the winner of that fight, wins a thrilling contest, but they're pretty evenly matched for the most part? Does Inouye go to number 1 pound for pound? Is Fulton as much of a quality win as, let's say, Crawford beating Spence? Would you put Fulton on a Spence level? Not for all he's accomplished, but as far as ability.
As a fighter?
Pound for pound, yeah.
I think that's pretty close. I think Fulton is a little more diverse, but I think what Spence does, he does really well. And that makes up for it because he has the fundamentals. But the difference is Fulton can fight on the fly and move. Spence has to go forward. So you would say Fulton is more diverse stylistically. But if Crawford beats Spence convincingly, he will have cleaned out 2 divisions where we know the caliber of opposition that were in him. I don't think Inouye can say that. So I don't know if Inouye can pass Crawford if they both win sensationally. But if Spence does, maybe.
Yeah, I want to say one fight that might never take place, but it went on Twitter today, but in a very respectful way. It was nice to see Shakur Stevenson challenge Lomachenko in a very nice way.
Yes.
And you should have all the belts, champ. Let's give people a real fight. That's the way it should be done. Very respectful. And Lomachenko answered back, indicating he wants the Haney rematch because he said that, yeah, I have unfinished business. I have no doubts that if Haney wasn't in the picture and that was the biggest fight for Lomachenko, he wouldn't think that, Stevenson's too risky a fight, because Lomachenko is one of the few real fighters who'll fight anyone.
I agree with that, Jack. Hey, Little Holmes, what's up? You're going to like what we have coming up a little later
How about Big Holmes today?
About Big Holmes.
Jack, let me push on the agenda, Frank, because we have some fun matchups that we want to give enough time to.
What's that?
We want to, our mythical matchups, I want to do justice to them, give them enough time.
All right, we will get to that. All right, what else do we want to discuss? All right, Jack, two heavyweight fights, and then we'll get to the mythical matchups. I see that Du Bois and Usyk are official for August. Do you give Du Bois any shot?
No.
None.
I hate to say, I mean, he's big, he's strong, he can punch a bit, but with Usyk's,
but he's slow.
Yeah, and Du Bois got knocked down 3 times before rallying in a fight, like a year and a half ago or something like that. One just quick word about the heavyweights. I'm disgusted with them. Fury doesn't fight, he talks. I don't want to set you off about Fury, Frank, but we're sick of him. And you look at Deontay Wilder, he's had 1 fight in the last couple of years or something. I know he's trying to get an Andy Ruiz fight, but if that's not happening, you got to fight someone. Anthony Joshua is going back in with a washed up Dillian White. They fought, 8 years ago? I mean, why do it again?
I know why Joshua's going the route that he is. Because he wants another camp under Derek James. He wants to stay active. I think he's confident against Dillian White. But, Jack, I'm at the point with Anthony Joshua, especially against a guy that can punch. I just don't rule anything out. And as I said last week, if I'm in Dillian White's corner, I would just say, look, this is your retirement fight. Now, you have a chance to get 2 dividend checks here if you can beat him. But you have nothing to lose. You gain nothing by going rounds with him or going to a decision and losing. Go after him like a wounded lion and try to knock him out. And if you don't knock him out, maybe with a couple punches, even if they miss, you'll put him on alert mode and he won't be as aggressive. And maybe you can steal a decision. And if somehow you walk out with a win, you line up for another big fight and a lot more money. So I can see why Joshua wants that fight. I don't think it does anything to improve his confidence or his psyche or get him ready for Wilder, other than the fact that he's busy. And as you said, Wilder, it'll be 2 years in October since he last fought. We know that's no good, but we know he has that punch, and he's not afraid to let it go.
Agreed with all your points.
All right, Jack, what else you want to hit?
Okay, those basically are the fights. I mean, we've gone to the point where we're taught, we talk about fights, not on this show, in the past, fights that should be made that aren't, like Usyk Fury, Beterbiev Bivol. I mean, the only reason Spencer Crawford are fighting because they've run out of options. Fighters always going to fight one another when they absolutely have no options, and not occasionally a fighter disappears rather than keep busy. Demetrius Andrade, is he retired or what? That's ridiculous.
I forgot all about that name till you mentioned. The same thing with Jamal Charlo.
Jamal Charlo hasn't fought for a couple of years. I think.
How does he hold that title?
He shouldn't be holding the title.
How does he hold the title? He hasn't fought for 2 years. How does that happen?
Sanctioning bodies get 3%. They're going to go with whoever is the biggest attraction, and who could claim. But let me say something with Errol Spence. He made a point that he was complimented on. Well, what did the sanctioning bodies do with the 3%? What did they do to earn it? What work did they do? Well, Errol Spence used those belts, sanctioning belts, as a bargaining tool. His bargaining tool all along. I hold 3 titles, you hold 1. So he was getting his money's worth out of giving the 3% to each of them.
And the fight is being billed as Spence Crawford.
Yeah.
So he is basically, even though he's a slight underdog, he is the A side. Did you happen to see All Access, the first episode?
No, I'll watch it. I get the feeling that conversations they had on the phone, this isn't a grudge match anymore. It's a competition. Don't get me wrong. As competitors, they both want to win badly, I'm sure. But I get the feeling the conversations they've had, they're probably joking around, working, putting together the fights. I don't think they dislike one another. Certain fighters.
No, I think you can tell, Jack, based on that episode of All Access, that they really do respect each other and that they wholeheartedly believe this is going to be their toughest fight. And I sense from both of them that they are both extremely confident that they're the better guy and they're going to win. I can't wait, Jack. I can't wait. I am so psyched for this fight. And this is what a good fight is, when you're not sure, at least to me, what defines it is, Jack. I think Crawford's going to win. I'm going to pick him to win. I'm not sure I'm going to bet on it, but I think he's going to win. But if he lost, would I be surprised? No. And that's the whole thing. I thought Sugar Ray Leonard was going to beat Hearns. Yeah. But did I see a scenario where Hearns would win? Absolutely. I thought Leonard was going to beat Duran, and he lost. So that's to me, that's a great fight when you poll 10 people and no more than 6 pick one guy.
I think the majority of people are picking Crawford, though. I don't think this is split down the middle when you talk to people.
I don't think it's overwhelmingly, but I do think more people will pick Crawford.
I think about 70%. I really do. I think something about Crawford. Crawford gives you the feeling he's a breakthrough superstar, perhaps. Spence doesn't give you that feeling. Spence just gives you the feeling he's a terrific fighter, maybe a pound-for-pound candidate. But Crawford gives you a little more of a buzz. Well, we might be talking about Sugar Ray Leonard here. We might be talking about a potential...
A generational fighter.
He gives you that feeling. You don't quite get the same feeling with Spence, but you also respect Spence enough to know.
Jack, let me just address Paul's question. I see he says, do you guys think Boots looks more comfortable orthodox or southpaw? I think he looks much more comfortable when he fights orthodox.
Well, he
I'll say
started
this,
quite
Paul. I think when he's orthodox, I like his left jab better than his right jab. But it seems to me he finishes better when he's a southpaw, and that's the way he got Vila out of there on Saturday night. And I think that also applies to Crawford, that, you know, it's kind of hard to pick a side where he's better, left or right. But I do think that Boots, the difference is, I think from a conventional stance, I think Boots has a little bit of a better jab than Crawford does.
Let's go. We got 6 mythical fights. Let's start.
All right, Jack, you go first. Now, these guys fought. Everybody knows James Jeffries had to lose 100 pounds. He hadn't fought in 6 years. He came out and fought the reigning champ. This is where the term the Great White Hope first was mentioned. James Jeffries and Johnson. Johnson won the first fight. What, again, in the 15th round?
Yeah.
Okay, stopped him.
He stopped him in the 15th.
Right.
July 4th, 1910 in Reno, Nevada. Yeah.
So the question is, what if Jack Johnson fought Jim Jeffries, prime Jim Jeffries, who didn't have to lose 100 pounds and wasn't out of boxing for 6 years? Who do you have there?
6 years.
I know.
Why did they hold it against Jeffries? No fight in boxing history, Frank, had his legacy damaged in a comeback fight, a fight past his peak to the extent of Jim Jeffries. People are talking like Johnson dominated a prime Jim Jeffries. It was an over-the-hill Jim Jeffries. You know, there was a quote attributed to Jeffries. I don't know what's true in that, saying afterwards, I don't think I ever could have beaten Jack Johnson. I could see him saying that. But there's also quotes that I read attributed to Johnson saying, I wonder who would have won had I fought Jeff in his prime. Johnson said that too. So I think you're going to get something in between. The young Jim Jeffries had a tremendous amount of energy. He was in this 25-round war with a fighter, Tom Sharkey,
right?
Heavyweight champion, a top contender at his time, tough as nails. And it was a bloodbath. He had endless stamina, endless.
See how Tom Sharkey was a beast.
Right, exactly. I think what happens, prime Johnson, prime Jeffries, Johnson starts getting control of the fight in the second half, doesn't stop Jeffries, but it's causing a lot of damage, hitting him, takes control. Johnson gets the better of it. It goes the distance. But does Johnson, the black man, get the decision? All politics aside, assuming the judging would be fair, and you certainly can't assume that at the time. Johnson wins on points, a tough fight, nothing like the one-sided, massacre that we saw.
Well, Jack, I don't like your answer because you basically took what I was going to say. Let me just say this. I'm not real comfortable on this for the fact that there is limited film of both guys. But I'll just reiterate what you said in a different way. I just think that based on what I've read, the minuscule amount of film that I've seen, I just think that even prime Jeffries would have been at a style disadvantage against Johnson, who did have enough size and speed where I think the fight probably would have gone the way you said. I think it might have been close down in the beginning, but Johnson probably just was the better boxer and just had the style matchup to beat Jeffries. And I think he probably wins the decision because as strong and powerful as Jeffries was, his record doesn't indicate that he was a life taker as a puncher. So I think Johnson was smart enough to tie him up, not engage, and just make it a boxing match. Maybe there's a couple close calls, but based on what I've seen, I guess this is like saying I picked Johnson, but I would make Johnson the favorite going in prime for prime.
Yeah, agreed. But tough fight, nothing like we saw before,
No, not a one-sided massacre, right. No. All right, number 2. Joe Louis and Rocky Marciano. We have 8 rounds of that to go by. I believe Louis was 37 in that fight, and Rocky was 30. Joe Louis has always said that guys that fight out of the crouch, that pressure, always give him trouble. As we know, Marciano got to Lewis in the 8th round. Jack, this is a very, 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 very tough one for me because I believe Joe Louis was one of the guys, like George Foreman, that did suicide to carry the fight to him. But if there was one guy who could probably have some success doing it, it would be Marciano. So based on what we saw when they fought, Lewis had nothing but a left hand. His right hand was non-existent at the time. Marciano was peaking. And after 5 rounds, Lewis was up 3-2. He ran out of gas, after the 5th round. And he was a sitting duck for Rocky's power. I don't think Rocky could go to Joe with the impunity that he did in 1951. It's a tough fight. I think Marciano is always 9 kinds of bad road for Lewis, but I think Lewis would beat Marciano if they fought prime for prime. I'm not sure he stops him, but I think he beats him.
No, I didn't realize that Lewis said what you just mentioned about fighters in the crouch giving him problems because he fought this.
He hated that. Tommy Farr did that in their first fight.
And Arturo Godoy kept very
Same
low
thing.
in the first fight, and it went at the distance, and he gave Lewis fits, but Lewis stopped him in a rematch. At the time Lewis fought Marciano, Lewis was a good fighter, actually. He wasn't.
He won what, 8 in a row?
Yeah, he was on the comeback trail. He was successful, but he wasn't knocking guys out. He wasn't the Brown Bomber of old. He went from being an all-time great fighter to merely a pretty good fighter, and a pretty good fighter is not going to beat Marciano at his best. You've got to be exceptional to do that. And I'm going to tell you, Lewis would have been so much more resilient. Now, Marciano would have gotten hit a lot more. He would have gotten hit with a lot of sharp punches coming in. I know he would have been crouching, but he would have had to have been on the defense a lot with Lewis. I don't mean keeping away, but he would have been worrying about getting hit with Lewis's punches, working his way inside. Maybe he would have been a little less aggressive because of Lewis's slashing punches. And a young Joe Louis, if he had to, I think he could have held Rocky off over the distance, even though the late rounds would have been pure hell for Lewis or anyone going against Marciano. I think Lewis would have hit him enough slashing punches, cut him up, stop Rocky in 11-12. Rocky on his feet, probably cuts and all.
Think about what you just said, though. Think about what you said, and I think that's the total key. Lewis was not, excuse me, he was not knocking guys out. Now, before he fought Marciano. So I say that your punch is one of the first things to go, because if you look at a lot of punchers at the end of their career, everybody goes the distance with them. They don't have all the knockouts.
Right. Thank you, Frank. I've always said that. You're the first one I ever heard agree with. Your punch.
Yeah, I always say that.
Not the last. Beautiful.
But Jack, think about this. If Joe Louis, and this is a predicament he was in 51, if you can't hurt Marciano, and the same thing applies to Frazier, if you can't hurt him and give him a little bit of trepidation coming in, he's just going to overwhelm you and beat you up. And that was the case when they fought. I don't know if Marciano, I don't think he could go at Louis with quite the same ferocity that he did the old Louis, because he didn't have to worry about getting hurt. So I think that's the whole thing. Louis, without his power and his sharpness, is a sitting duck for Marciano. But prime Louis that fought Max Baer and Max Schmeling, I'm not sure, as tough as he is, as much as I love Rocky, I'm not sure he could carry it to Louis that way. And in closing, remember this. The two best punchers that Rocky fought, Archie Moore and Walcott, they both did put him down. I know they both got knocked out, but they don't hit like Joe Louis. So I think we've made a pretty good case where Louis is the favorite going in, and I would pick him, but it's a tough fight.
Yeah. Yeah, it would always be a tough fight for Lewis. I mean, just Marciano's aggression, his toughness.
Yeah, nobody
Yeah,
beats Marciano easy. Maybe
yeah,
maybe Foreman, maybe Lennox Lewis, but only the big monsters that are just too big physically for him.
yeah.
All right, Jack, here's one you're familiar with. I know you have some thoughts on, as do I, but you listed Joe Frazier versus George Foreman. Now, they fought in 73. Joe Frazier was 214 pounds. That's 9 pounds more than he was when he fought Muhammad Ali 22 months before that. The Joe Frazier that fought Muhammad Ali was clearly one of the most determined, great heavyweights in history. He was not that same guy who fought George Foreman. So the question is, if we take Joe Frazier from March 8th, 71, and we put him in a time machine, and we put him against George Foreman, January 22nd, 1973, who wins? You go.
Did I tell you? I mentioned this once before on the show. You may have forgotten a while ago.
No, I know what you're going to say.
Yeah, 1996. I'm in the News One studio in New York. Smoking Joe's there with his son Marcus. He has a book coming out to promote his book. I get some alone time.
Bill Berger wrote the book.
Story, right. And I asked Joe that exact question because I was always curious. Could this Joe Frazier, that fighter, beaten Foreman, the Foreman who beat him in Jamaica? So I asked Joe the question. Joe doesn't answer. He just doesn't answer. So I asked him a second time. Could the U of March 8th, 1971 have beaten that Foreman in Jamaica? And finally he says, I don't think it would have made any difference. I say, is it a question of styles? He said, that's exactly what it is. So he acknowledged that him who beat Ali wouldn't have beaten the Foreman in Jamaica. And I agree, but it would have been a heck of a fight. It would have been a heck of a fight. They fought the rematch. Foreman didn't knock him down till the 5th round. The Smoking Joe of March 8th, 1971 would have been coming at Foreman like a pit bull. Maybe he gets strapped once or twice early, but he bounces back with resiliency, and he's going to hurt George. He's going to have George in trouble, and it's going to be a thrilling war, but eventually Foreman gets over his Susie Q in honor of Marciano. I use that punch. And he stops Joe in the 8th and 9th round of an absolute, thriller.
All right, Jack. We have the same result, but we get there differently. I just think it's the worst possible matchup in the world for Frazier, and here's why. You look at Frazier's entire career. How many guys did he fight that actually could hurt him on the outside before he could get inside? Only one, Foreman. And that's the difference. Joe will never be able to get inside a Foreman. If he could get inside and stay there and get in his chest like he did Ali, he might have a chance. But the one punch Frazier was vulnerable to because of his style, same applies to Tyson and Marciano, were the uppercuts. And Foreman probably is the hardest uppercut punching fighter in heavyweight history. So I don't think any version of Frazier could get inside on Foreman, because I just think Foreman would hurt Joe before he started to smoke or before he could get inside. I just think it's a terrible matchup, and it is strictly styles. And Jack, here's something else too. Frazier did catch Foreman with a couple left hooks in that first fight. And Jack, Foreman never changed his expression. And some guys just react to other guys' punches differently. If you look at it, Frazier's punches bothered Ali more than Foreman's did. But yet, Foreman did not even acknowledge that Frazier hit him, where we know when he hit Ali not only went down, but Ali was hurt by him. So I just think it's one of those matchups that you can't do anything about. There's nothing you could do, because Frazier tried to adjust in the second fight by moving and circling. But here's the problem. If Joe Frazier goes into the ring and he can't come at you and apply the pressure and force you back, he's not Joe Frazier. So when they fought the second time, granted, Frazier was 32, past his prime, but the bottom line is Frazier is only Frazier when he's coming forward. And George Foreman, when he comes forward, he gets slaughtered doing that. I think if it's March 8th Frazier, I think it might go 3 rounds, but I don't really think it's a rock'em sock'em fight, because I just think Foreman hurts Frazier before Frazier can ever get going, and he never allows him to recover.
We both feel Foreman would win, but people keep holding it against Joe Frazier, the first fight with Foreman. He wasn't the same fighter as before. He hit a low in his career. I'll give you a case in point. The Frazier, the first Ali fight, would have knocked out the Foreman of the Ron Lyle fight. The Foreman of the Ron Lyle fight doesn't beat the Frazier, the first Ali fight.
Yeah, I think he does.
Foreman was at a spot in his career. No, he wasn't punching crisply.
He would have looked so sharp against him, because Frazier would have been right there, Jack. He would have looked sharp.
Let's get on next match. Are we both
Wait 1 second, though. I want to address one thing you said, and it's big. You're right. There is probably not one major fight in history where the result hurt the perception the way Frazier's career, all he gained by beating Ali, was lost and then some in the way he lost to Foreman. And here's my counter to that. Well, let me ask you this. Who else that has held the heavyweight title could have done to Frazier what Foreman did? I'm sorry, I can't name anybody else who would have done that. It just so happened to be that Frazier was in a bad spot that night against Foreman. But you put Tyson or Dempsey there, Foreman does the same thing to them. I'm done. Go ahead. We got Ali versus Holmes.
That's an intriguing matchup. It really is at their peaks, because Holmes matches up well with Ali. He matches up well with Ali, fights a lot like him. It would be mirror images of one another to an extent. I just got to feel that Ali's superior speed, moving, lateral speed, moving around, gives him that little edge. It gives him that edge, but I think it's a tough fight. I think you're talking about, in their primes, 9 rounds to 6, that type fight, maybe 10-5, very competitive, good fight, great chess match. And what can I say? But Ali's extra foot speed, as I mentioned, is kind of the difference. He'd be able to avoid Holmes's punches slightly better than the other way around.
All right, I'll do this quick, because my thoughts are pretty succinct on this. Number one, both guys hated to fight somebody that had a good jab. That's one. Holmes is better fundamentally, but it wouldn't come into play there. Ali's quicker. To me, Jack, that fight comes down to one thing. One of those guys is going to have to assume the role as the puncher. And when I say that, I mean he's going to be that guy that's going to carry the fight. I think that's Holmes, and I think that favors Ali. Holmes is not his best when he's fighting as the attacker, and Ali is at his best when his opponent's coming at him to try to take his head off. So I think because of that, and I think because Ali, I just think that Ali's ring presence, it's just so much bigger than Holmes, and he had a way of looking like he was doing so much more than he was. I just think when Ali cut loose, it would look more impressive, like he was winning and beating up Holmes more than the opposite. Ali wins a decision. I'll go 9-6, 8-6-1 in a very boring fight where neither guy gets hurt, neither guy goes down, and nobody is talking that they're 2 of the 5 greatest heavyweights at all time afterwards.
If let me just ask you, Frank, had Ali met Norton while he was in his prime, at his best, how do you see it playing out?
I think it looks like the second fight a little more pronounced for Ali, but I think Norton goes the distance. I think Norton would always give Ali trouble, but he wouldn't give Ali of 66, 67 as much trouble because Ali's speed and defense and legs were so much better. Ali wins the decision, but he doesn't kill him. It's just one of those matchups. All right, Jack, you ready for our next one? These guys fought when they fought. Larry Holmes was 38. Mike Tyson was 21. As we know, Mike Tyson won in the 4th round. Who do you have prime for prime?
Oh, easy, Tyson. They could fight 10 times. Tyson's going to beat them all 10. You know, if you tell me Holmes was a greater fighter than Tyson, rate him as a high on the heavyweight scale, no argument for me at all. He's had a better career, Holmes, than Tyson. And like I said, if he was a greater fighter in all probability, but he was hittable. Holmes was hittable. There's no way a peak Tyson he was going to avoid. I mean, Tyson dominated him basically when they fought. Holmes was on the defensive for 3 rounds. Tyson obliterated him in the 4th round. The Holmes that beat Cooney, the Holmes that beat Norton, he's not going to live with Tyson. Tyson's going to, at some point, nail Holmes, put him in bad trouble, and put him out. I mean, it's not a hard matchup for me to, predict head-to-head.
I disagree. I agree with this. I agree that Tyson has a style matchup, and he has that in his favor, because I do think guys that attack, that are swarmers, like a Frazier.
Tyson's got faster hands than Holmes. People don't realize that.
Inside, but not outside. But I'll give you that to a degree. But, Jack, if Tony Tucker can push him 12 rounds with a jab, okay, and and Buster Douglas could take his head off with a right uppercut and keep him blunted with his jab, I think it's the same thing as Marciano and Lewis. The Holmes that fought Tyson had nothing to keep him off. I think the Holmes that fought Cooney or Ali has enough, and I just think that Holmes is the tougher guy, the more resourceful guy. I would favor Holmes, but it's a very tough matchup for Holmes. I will give Tyson that, but I just can't pick against Holmes, just knowing Tyson's character deficiencies. And I know that the Holmes jab of 80, 81, 82 could slow Tyson down and impede his aggression. And if he does that, he beats him. I'm going to go slight edge to Holmes, but I can see the case where Tyson wins.
You give examples, why Holmes would beat Tyson. You point to the Tony Tucker fight, the Buster Douglas fight. I could point to Holmes' fight with Mike Weaver, where he was on the brink of getting stopped. If that was Tyson in there, he would have gotten him out of there. You could give these examples all day, Frank.
You can do that. Although Holmes had a bad cold that night, but yeah, you could do that.
Oh, but no excuse for Tyson. But Tyson was in peak form, but Holmes had.
Okay, so James Quick Tillis is Larry Holmes and never had Tyson. Was never hurt by Tyson at all, and gave him his toughest fight. In fact, because
Tyson
he went the distance with him, they lined up 3 sissies for Tyson to knock out.
Yeah. But Tyson was a young fighter on the way up. You can't hold.
Wait a second, Jack. He beat Trevor Berbick 3 months later, and some people say that's one of the greatest Tysons ever. You can't pick it. You can't pick their spots with Tyson. He was great in 86, but not in May of 86.
He beat him the same year, but it was something like 8 fights later he beat him. Tyson was a very active heavyweight.
3 or 4 fights, I believe.
No, more like 8 fights, Frank. Look it up.
Well, I know Tyson had three setups after he went the distance with Tillis and Green. It may have been okay, Jack. He fought Alfonso Ratliff for cruiserweight. He was washed up, so he may have had 4 or 5 fights, but he didn't go rounds.
Yeah, but he was building towards championships.
All right, real quick, Klitschko versus Fury, Jack. I'll take it. I just think that I've seen enough now. Fury has the height, the size, and the temperament to get Klitschko out of his game. I think Fury wins the decision.
I agree. We're on the same page, Frank. Fury always beat Klitschko most of the time, win a decision.
8 out of 10 times.
Yeah, Klitschko beating Fury now and then, but Fury winning, more.
But
fights.
Fury did not beat the best Klitschko, Jack. He did beat him. He got him 10 years after he had held the title. And I don't know if Fury was ever better. That's the most fit Fury I ever saw. And that was a terrible fight.
Klitschko was fading a little bit because he struggled to beat Brian Jennings at the Garden, and that's a very ordinary fighter.
That was a horrible fight to watch. All right, Jack. Thanks for watching, everybody. Great show. We'll be back next week to talk about this coming week's boxing action. Good night.
Good night.